Is planning reform the answer to building 1.5 million new homes in the UK? Is land banking a concern we should be worried about? I speak to veteran of the property industry, Peter Bill, as we look at what are people's perceptions of the housing crisis. Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the Rodcast. I am very excited to welcome our guest today, who is the former editor of Building and Estates Gazette, author of multiple books on housing, and now writes for the Estates Gazette. Welcome, Peter Bill.
Thank you very much, Rod. It's a delight to be here. Yes, I've just come back to the Estates Gazette after 10 years away, and I'll be starting a new column with them in early April.
Fantastic.
Every week from April time, coming home again.
Brilliant. Look forward to it. So, Peter, how did you get into the property industry? Was it the journalism or property that led, and how did that progress into you getting back into the Estates Gazette?
Well, I started off working in the early 60s as an articled surveyor and estimator with a small firm of country builders, and then I moved to a big firm of builders in Oxford called Kingerleys, then off to Wimpey's where I did some work for them in Oxford, and then I went to Africa for a couple of years working on big projects out there, and then I came back and worked for Wimpey's for about 7 or 8 years. And then you're in your mid-30s and you think, I don't really want to be a quantity surveyor anymore, what else can I try? So I saw an advert in the paper for a reporter on a construction magazine called Contract Journal, and the pay was better. And they threw in a company car, which was fantastic. So I took that job, and then and realised that journalism was what I should have been doing from the start. So my start in journalism was quite late. I then moved to Building magazine after a couple of years and ended up editing that for 7 or 8 years. And then I thought, I've had enough of the building trade. I'll go to the city. So I spent a terrible year working for a merchant bank in the city called Robert Fleming. It's a very below-stairs job, where my job was to try and persuade the analysts to write notes that fund managers could understand, as opposed to the gobbledygook that they wrote. So I did that for a bit, and then I came back and got a job on Estates Gazette. So I only really discovered the property market, as opposed to the construction market, in about the mid-90s. When I came to Estates Gazette as editor.
Fantastic. And so how would you say, I mean, we know that they're linked, don't we? So
Yeah.
You've got the property and the construction market. What were the main differences in terms of kind of reporting on
Money, essentially. The building trade, as you probably know, there's very little money in it. If you make a 4% margin, you're lucky. Most of the time you don't even make that. Whereas the property trade, well, you put in 20 to start with, don't you? And then hope you're going to get 15 or 10. So there's a lot more money around in property, but it's much riskier than people find. The other thing I found was the builders are a bit standoffish to journalists. And when I was at Building magazine, we didn't see a lot of them. We were regarded with wariness by the big contractors. But at Estates Gazette, it was fantastic. Really welcoming group of people that we met with. Very enjoyable set of relationships built up with the big developers and the big agents. And so probably my time at Estates Gazette, which lasted as editor from the late 90s to 2011, was probably the best job I ever had, really.
Brilliant.
And then I thought, I'm going to stop doing this.
So why did you stop?
I was getting old. I was in my early 60s by then, and I had a column with the Evening Standard, which I'd been doing for a couple of years. So every week I wrote this whole page for the city column of the Evening Standard. That was continuing. I made sure that would continue. So I just basically retired from full-time employment, wrote for the Standard every week, wrote for Estates Gazette every week until about 2016 and 17. Then they finally had enough of me. And then I went off to write for Property Week, and then But during that time, when I was not full-time employed, I wrote a book called Planet Property, which is really, it's not a housing book. It's a commercial property book, really.
Yeah.
It's the adventures of a commercial property editor over a period of about 10 years. So I did that, carried on writing for Estates Gazette, carried on writing for Property Week. And then just last month, Estates Gazette, which has been bought by a new publisher, came to me and said, "But I'd like to come back." So I'm going back there in April and starting a weekly column with them.
Fantastic.
So that's where we are.
Well, I hope I hope you enjoy it as much as you did on the last stint you had there.
I'm sure I will. Sure I will. Thanks, Rob.
So, Peter, well, look, we hear a lot at the moment in the press about the housing crisis in this country. What does that term mean to you?
There's a perception. Let's take the perception of the housing crisis. There is a housing crisis. That is the perception. Houses cost too much. More homes are needed. Volume house builders build most of the homes, don't they? They complain about planning and red tape and land shortages. So the red tape has to be cut and more land zoned for housing. That's the perception. If that happens, house builders will then build more homes. Because they build more homes, they won't cost as much as they do now. And the housing crisis will end. So that's the perception. And as you can tell from my tone of voice, I think it's a load of really. They're fallacies. They're complete fallacies. The conclusions that I've just spelt out do not follow from the statements. The suggestion that the state can exercise control over private house building, it's nothing more than a convenient political untruth, or a lie, if you'd like to call it that. And the problem with that is that from this untruth, there are 4 fallacies that run from them. One is the fallacy that not enough homes are being built. Okay. 2, that more new homes will bring down the prices. And 3, that tinkering with the planning will see more new homes come through. And 4, a small one, but prefabrication is the answer. That's fallen away a bit, seeing it hasn't turned out to be the answer, but we can come back to that. But just to be a bit more serious, if you're between 20 and 40, 25 and 40, and you can't get on the first rung of the housing ladder, there is a housing crisis for you. If prices are 18 times the average salary, it's a crisis to you. Prices are too high for you. They're too high for you to afford. That doesn't mean there's a housing crisis. That means it's a personal crisis. But you have to ask yourself, is this crisis the fault of the house builders charging too much? I don't think so. They charge what the market will bear. Just like somebody who makes pencils. They'll charge whatever they think they can get for the pencils. But in the case of house builders, the price they charge is linked to the price of second-hand homes. Has to be, doesn't it? You can't charge 4 times as much for a new one as a second-hand one. You can charge about 15 to 20% more because people like the smell of a fresh new house. The fact that price then falls by 15 to 20% as soon as you walk across the threshold is not really you don't really know that's going to happen until it happens to you. Mm-hmm. And then it takes 5 years for the house to regather its price. But that's what happens. And there's this sort of inchoate feeling that house builders should charge less for their houses because it's a disgrace they cost too much. Well, if they did, they're linked to the price of second-hand houses. And those living in second-hand houses aren't supposed to cut the price of their houses because people can't afford them, are they? They get what they can for them, just like a house builder does. So what you've got is an affordability crisis for that group of people.
And in terms of affordability, so you mentioned their kind of house prices. We see it in the news all the time. The house prices are 18 times earnings or whatever it is. But I've got an issue with that because most first-time buyers do not buy with cash. And so the affordability is almost, you've got to kind of put it in 2 parts. You've got to do your upfront costs as a percentage of your income, and then you've got to do your servicing costs, so your mortgage finance costs as a percentage of income. So if you look back to 1989, where house prices were 3 times earnings, you think, oh, is that more affordable? Well, ask someone buying in 1989 that was paying 16 to 17% on their interest,
Yeah.
and 70% of their income
Yeah.
was going on servicing. And you'll probably quickly realise it's not more affordable. So
No.
how can we look at those things and in terms of affordability and to go, well, is it still really unaffordable for the majority of people in that sector, i.e. your 25 to 35-year-old who wants to buy a house?
I think it sort of patently is. I mean, I'm not very good on all the financial side
Yep.
of the buyers, but I think it's patently unaffordable for many of them. And that's why the numbers being built aren't as high as they perhaps would be if they were more affordable. But just to finish on the crisis thing, there is a terrible crisis in housing. These are the people who can't afford to buy or rent at market prices.
Mm-hmm.
It's 1.25 million families. We're talking about 6 million people who can't afford to buy and they can't afford to rent at market rents. For this group, there is a terrible, undeniable crisis. So whilst I've said there isn't a housing crisis on 2 seconds, there is for this group, and we can come back to what might be done about it later. There is only one answer for this group, which we can come back to later. Can I just go through the 4 factoids in slightly more detail? Building homes, building more houses will lower prices. That if you build more homes, the prices will come down. There are about 25 million homes in Britain. Last year, 250,000 were added, let's say, so 1%. The government wants to put that up. Let's say the flow was increased to 300,000 a year. And remember, these houses cost 15 to 20% more than second-hand houses anyway. In what world does adding 50,000 to 250,000 when there's a stock of 25 million decrease the price of the 25 million homes? It doesn't. Not at all. If you come locally, let's go local now, because most housing markets are local, aren't they? You've got a town with 50,000 homes, say they cost average of £250,000 each. Let's say they add 500 homes on their stock in a year, 1%, and they sell for £300,000 each because they cost more. You just pay more like for like. On what planet does that lower the price of houses in that area? Doesn't. Can't, because they cost more anyway. So that's the first factoid.
So on that, obviously the price is what someone's willing to pay and what the other party is willing to sell at.
Yes.
So if you had an increase in supply that countered that big demand, so for example, I don't know, if I've got the 3 of us sitting around here today, if I've got 1 apple and I say, right, who'll give me 100 quid for this?
Yeah.
If you haven't got 100 quid, you can't buy it.
No.
Okay?
No.
But if there comes a point where I go, hey, I've got 3 apples, for you it's going to be 100 quid, you're not going to buy it. But then if someone goes, well, I'll give you 10 quid, and suddenly I've got to make that choice as to whether I either sell it or I don't.
Yeah.
Because he's willing to buy it at £10, but I've also got to be willing to sell. So if I don't sell, then what do I do? So is this a problem where homes are built and they're not sold? Or is it a problem where the people building them look at forecasting what they're going to sell for and therefore don't bother building because they go, well, we're not going to make any money out of it?
Well, I think you've sort of hit it on the head, actually, Rob. The price, the number of houses built in Britain new homes built in Britain correlates almost exactly with economic growth. Okay, so that's the first thing to remember. It doesn't correlate with the number of planning permissions, which we could come back to and go mad over. So the sales of houses, they dance to the tune of the economy, not the number of plots that have been given planning. As you know, a house builder, it doesn't quite apply to small house builders, but the bigger house builders, when they go to buy land, they know how many a week they want to sell before they buy the land. This is done very early on. So if you've got a big site, you used to say, we're going to sell one a week. And that's fed into the model, into the appraisal, which gives you the time frame. Time frame allows you to work out your financing costs as well as your sales costs. And from that model comes the one a week. It's called the SPOW rate, sales per outlet per week. Very familiar thing. Recently, it's been going down to 0.6, 0.7, 0.5, but it used to be 1, and it's now about 0.7. So that's all built into the price. And what happens, or happened when I was at Wimpey's, I was on the housing side at Wimpey's for 7 or 8 years, and it's ever so simple, really. You've got a big housing site. You've got maybe 500 homes on it. You start off, you build a show area, you release about 10 plots, and if they sell out overnight, you stop immediately, and you only release 4 plots in the second release, because obviously you've underpriced the first set of plots. So you contract the number you release in order to bring down the numbers of sales per week to the figure which is what you have in your appraisal, because everything is based upon that original appraisal. And then if you put the 4, and you obviously put the price of the 4 up because you think you can get more for them.
Yeah.
Then when those 4 don't sell for 3 months, you realise that you've overpriced them. And what you do then is you don't put more on the market at the same price. You offer incentives on the 4 in order to pretend that the price you're selling them at remains the same. And that's how you try and get rid of them. And then at some point in time, you release a few more. And once you get to the point where you're selling about 1 a week, you've just about got the thing in balance. You're selling at the right rate based on your appraisals. They're about the right price because people are buying 1 a week and everybody's happy.
What happens if you're building a block of flats and you've got 300 units in the flats?
That's completely different.
Yeah.
No, I'm talking about
It's
suburbia.
different. Yeah.
No, I think flats is a different thing, but you can still release them in small uplands.
Yeah.
But of course, you've got to build a whole lot of.
Well, that's my point. Yeah.
In one go. So it's much more.
So there you're really looking at how you can. I don't know if you've got investors coming to sell 30% of them, for example, at once, and how can I offload that stock? Where else can I offload? So there's a different kind of. Different mechanics.
It's a different, because as you know more than I do, the lenders will probably only lend you the money on the basis that you've forward sold X%,
Sure.
which covers the debt. So that's how it works on that. But the same things once you've built the block, because that's obviously you've taken that into your appraisal. You've spent all this frigging money on this block, and then you've probably forward sold 30% of them or something to get your debt. And then you start to sell them using the SPOW rate thing.
Yeah.
And if none are selling, you panic and, one way or another, you try and get them sold off. I think it comes back to the second factoid. Broken Homes has got a subtitle, which is Faults, Factoids and Facts or something. So you know what a factoid is. You're aware of what a factoid is. It's a commonly held belief that is not true.
Yeah.
Okay. And the second factoid is that improving the planning system will bring more homes. Improving the planning system has never, ever brought forth more homes. Never. Not in the whole history of planning, going back 100 years.
Now, on this point, I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
But I'm starting to think potentially there might be differences on the horizon. So I'll tell you why I agree with you. The reason why I agree with you is at the moment, you can reduce all the red tape on planning that you like and get things through nice and quickly. But one, we've got the big house builders and developers who already have planning for sites in their pipeline. So why aren't they building those all out? And it probably goes back to what you just mentioned. But the other thing is finance and construction, so labour. So who's going to build it as well as the other thing? Now, the reason why I say potentially in my mind I'm kind of umming and ahhing whether that's changing at the moment is because SME development has pretty much disappeared in this country. The market share of house building by SMEs has fallen year on year because it's incredibly risky now to do it. Costs are way too high as a percentage of the margin that you can make. But if planning regulations are changing to open that up for SMEs, so take us for an example. Our average time to get through planning is 2 years. And these are for small schemes. And it's just way too long. It's too costly and it just means things are very, very difficult to do. So if that can be opened up, it makes it a little bit more nimble for us to do. And would it then be the case that actually the SMEs can start picking up a bit more market share? Now, where do we find the construction workers from is still the same issue. But I just wonder what your thoughts are on that. Do you think there's opportunities for SMEs there?
I'd like to think so, but I don't. And the reason I say that is not in the short term. I think I'll say 2 or 3 things. One is you cannot and should not rely upon the state to help you if you're a small builder. If any of your calculations are based upon the state doing something, God help you. I do think, though, that these new planning regulations, I think they're doing their best and they're doing fairly well. I think the bulldozer is working, and I think that it will be helpful, but it's not going to be helpful for smaller builders for now. I think I can't see anything bedding in for at least 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
You've got fundamental issues over the number of planners, the number of the local authorities. Things take a long time. So I wouldn't advise any SMEs to be banking on the planning system changing any time soon.
Mm-hmm.
But I think in the longer term, yes, possibly it will become easier. I do think that the government should do more for the SMEs. It's very difficult. They keep trying. They offer soft loans. Well, they have offered soft loans, but they weren't that bloody expensive.
Well, also they offered loans, but structured for large corporations, and that was the problem.
Oh, was it?
So everything became a tick box exercise. So Homes England kind of had these funds, but it was impossible to borrow it because you failed at the first hurdle because you're an SME. And so, and I get it, because in order to lend to those SMEs, you've got added costs as a lender because you've got to spend more time underwriting per pound that you're lending out and things like that. So it is hard, yeah.
I think beware of a government that says we're here to help you. They tend not to actually help you in the end. They do help the big house builders, which is another subject. But I think if they were serious about helping SMEs, what they should do is this is from an SME builder. I got this one. He said what they should do is to reintroduce Help to Buy, but only for those who build no more than 100 houses a year or something like that. That would help. It wouldn't help a lot, but it would help a bit.
Well, it would help get more spades in the ground, rather than sort of sales and figures like that. Yeah.
But my general view is, do not expect the government to help you. There's a real issue here. There's a guy on LinkedIn yesterday, a small builder, complaining really bitterly about the whole system. All right. I mean, everything he said was completely justified. The problem is, who's going to help you? Nobody. You can moan about these things, but, and it gets it off your chest, but don't expect anybody to help you out here. The key question in all this is, why would they? Or why should they help you? And the answer isn't because it's a good thing or it will bring more houses.
Well, I guess from a local government point of view, it's finance, and it's to stop themselves spending a fortune on temporary accommodation.
Possibly.
And it's kind of those sort
No,
of things.
I take your point on that. There is that, and some councils are doing quite well at that, and they have joined the dots together. So there are some quite good figures on that, and some councils, only some, have worked that out, and they're intervening in the market themselves, and they're buying land themselves, and they're building council houses on it.
Well, they're almost creating their own miniature sovereign wealth funds for these local authorities, where they're going out and realising that actually this is saving us money over the long run by putting money into it now and building.
But it's a small number of enlightened councils that are doing it. Most of them are essentially run by NIMBYs. The really good thing in the planning bill is the fact that they're going to be cut out of the power line, which was very good. I thought that's a very clever move, that, and should make life easier. They've got to make it quicker. 2 years, it's ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous.
Well, it just means that there's far too much risk, and so that's why people choose not to bother.
Yeah, exactly. I'll just throw in the factoid 3, but you can cut this out if you haven't got any time. This idea that prefabricated homes was going to solve the housing crisis, it infected the market for about 3 or 4 years, back in between about 16 and 17 and about 20, and it was a ludicrous idea. The government got it into its head that it should push forward the idea of prefabrication on the basis that if you build faster and more cheaply, more homes will be built and they'll be sold at lower prices. Honest to God, I spoke to a minister about this. He said, you do know they sell them at the price they can get for them. They don't sell them cheaper because they're bolted together. And they didn't get that. They did not get that. And neither did the people who invested hundreds of millions of pounds in these factories without having a supply chain.
I mean, I get it if they're going to do that for local authority housing, to get it up and running, to get people in them quicker, because it saves them money over a long time.
But they're not building local authority housing.
Well, exactly, and that's the problem, isn't it? Anyway. Yeah. On the subject of local authority housing, how has the change in local authority ownership and development of homes affected housing, do you think?
It's terrible. It's been absolutely terrible. I don't think there's any going back. The infrastructure that allowed council houses to be built has been destroyed. What's happened is has been the destruction of their ability to do it. But what's also happened over the last 30 years is that homes have got smaller, gardens have got smaller still. As house builders compete for land based upon the the gross development value, the higher you can stick up the GDV, the more you can pay for the land. Everybody knows what the limits are on GDV because it's based on space standards and things like that. So there's this natural tendency to squeeze. And that's happened. I mean, I've got the figure here somewhere. I mean, in England, since 1996, there has been a 68% overall increase in the number of homes built on every hectare. 68%. Now, that's partially because there's lots of flats being built, to be fair. And it's partially because in London, there are lots of flats as well. But the average number of homes on each plot has gone up a big amount. It used to be 12 to the acre when I was a lad.
It would be interesting looking at what that looks like outside of cities because of urbanisation and how much kind of people are over the. I mean, take out COVID, but in general, there's a lot more people living in cities than there are in other. Sort of,
I think if you look at if you take a drone and fly it over new housing estates, you can see the difference.
Mhm.
There's several things going on. One is the gardens are about the size of this room. They used to be. The percentage of homes without front and back gardens has gone up from 5%. Every 95% had homes and gardens. Now 45% of all homes don't have gardens at all. The lengths of the gardens have shortened. If you fly over any new estate, the gardens are exactly the same width as the house, if it's not detached, and they go back they're about 12, 15 feet wide at the most, 11 feet in some cases, and they go back 15 to 20 feet, and they put these pathetic little fences around them that are 6 foot high, and if you've been in one of these houses with a couple and they've got 2 children, it will break your bloody heart.
So is that a space issue in not space standards, but is that an issue more of finding the land space for which to build or being able to build on both?
It's being able to.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a whole couple of chapters in Broken Homes, which I won't go into, about how actually the space standards, internal space standards, need to go up 20% to go back to where they were, and density levels should come down by 20% to where they were.
But how would that work on costings to build? Because obviously that then costs more to build, and then does that mean that prices are going to go higher?
There's a lot of mathematics in these 2 chapters, and it works out, yes, of course the land is going to cost less, is going to be worth less, but it's not as much as you think because the price of those houses is higher.
Mm-hmm.
But the only way it can be done is if everybody's forced to do it. So you can't have one bloke do it. You've got to say.
Well, now we go back to the state controlling things, don't we?
But all you have to do is to put up the minimum space standards. Mm-hmm. They're supposed to be minimum. Those standards, they're not minimum. They're the standards now. You put them up by 20%. People have room to breathe. There's a whole section in Broken Homes about the ghosts in the machine. Everybody ignores the tenants or the occupiers. It's all about density, density, density. And what they've done now is to hook density into saving the planet.
Well, I guess when you look at this, you're looking at what's the demand like for something, so for your product. And that's why we're seeing a lot more capital flowing into single-family homes now than there has been, certainly since I've been in property for new build homes. So that's, I guess, a positive that's coming out of this because people are seeing
too many flats.
Too many flats,
and they're quite right. The flat prices aren't going up because there's too many, and single-family homes seem to be the answer. But there's Boris Johnson, for instance, came out with the Parker Boris, as I called it. When I was writing for the Standard, I actually suggested that Boris Johnson, when he was mayor, should become prime minister. I said it as a joke.
Careful what you wish for.
Never thinking it would happen. But I said it because he cottoned on. And he said, look, these are the bloody rabbit hutches we're building. We need to make them bigger. And he proposed a 10% increase in the minimum space standards for London. I don't quite know where it went or where it is now, but I thought it was a terrific idea. Because once the government says it's got to be higher, that adjusts to the price. The land price has to adjust to that.
Or the sales price adjusts to it.
Yeah, they can go up.
Yeah.
Go up.
And so look, with the number of homes built by SME developers, it's reduced so much over the last 30 years.
Yeah.
Why is that?
I think there are several things going on. The main one, which is the inexorable march of capitalism. In other words, everything gets bigger. Anybody who's successful gets bigger, and they get bigger because they As they get bigger, they can buy more land. As they get bigger, people will lend them money at a slightly better rate. And as they get bigger, crucially, as they get bigger, their buying power increases. And therefore, instead of paying, $2,000 for a kitchen set of kitchen units, they buy 1,000 kitchen units and only pay 1,000 quid for them. So there are enormous savings of scale if you're a big contractor, a big house builder. Huge. So that's what's been happening. But I think there's a sort of self-limiting, because they don't bother with anything under about 50 houses, do they? So there is always that market there. They're not going to come and buy and build 50 houses, are they, Barrett's, in your area?
Well, I don't know, because it goes back to that kind of, if we can build houses and sell them one at a time, actually, we can have those things going and ticking through. Whether or not they're going to do a 6-unit scheme of flats, probably, no. Definitely not.
Well,
but maybe on the single-family homes, I can see that happening.
40 or 50 houses, I suppose.
But yeah, I think it goes back to all the other costs. So not construction costs, but all the other operational costs of buying a site and getting planning and building it out. For the size, again, it goes back to those economies of scale. For the size of the profit you're getting, they make up such a big percentage. And so that just creates so much more risk for those SME builders. So what can be done to entice them back into the market?
Nothing, I don't think.
Really?
I mean, it sounds terribly brutal to say so, but I think most things have been tried.
Mm-hmm.
I think the planning thing will help in about 2 years' time and make it slightly easier. But what's easier for one is easier for another. Therefore, you've got more competition, because nobody's prepared to wait 2 years. Say one person can afford to wait 2 years. Well, maybe 4 people can afford to wait a year.
Yeah.
So it's not wonderful news. It's okay news, but it's not wonderful news. I think if you're a small contractor or a small developer, I mean, seeing the planning's the bugger, isn't it? It's a nightmare.
So it's the time frame.
Yeah,
it's the time frame.
But
so,
why not buy old houses and do them up? Because you don't need planning for new houses.
Well, again, it's the operational cost. So it's the stamp duty you're paying on those. It's the excessive stamp duty. It's those kind of things that then create, well, hold on, now I'm buying it. On day one, I'm in negative equity, because if I have to sell at this point. So then you've got to make sure for every £1 you're spending on doing it up, you've got to be making a serious margin on that to cover all those costs. So it's tough. And that's why a lot of people aren't doing it. And you've got, I don't know, if you look at the prime London, so right at the top of the market coming in, normally what happens is when you get to these stages in the market, well, foreign money piles in and goes, well, actually that's a good deal now. Yeah. But it's not happening because we've put up all these sort of frictional costs on them as well. So even though you might go, God, the pound's weak against the dollar, now's a good time to come in. House prices in real terms are kind of still around 2014, 2015 for prime London. I'll jump in. Oh, no, wait, I've got 19% stamp duty.
I mean, you tell me, what's the only other thing I thought of coming up on the train was that like large developers, not the house builders, but developers in London in particular, they tend to sell off about 20 or 30% of their stuff to somebody or another. Is there any, do smaller house builders bring in equity partners very early on? They must do.
Yeah, they will do. So you'll use, well, if you've got enough equity, then you're in a much stronger position. Yeah. But sometimes you've got to get rid of a bit of a risk for a portion of the potential rewards. So it's worth taking on equity. Yeah. And obviously that's what people
that happens a bit.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So it's where, well, look, it's enticing capital, isn't it? Because really that's what it comes down to. How are we going to motivate capital to put money into housing? And at the moment, when you look at how long it takes, because time
It's
costs,
the time
it's the
thing.
cost of capital over that time.
Yeah.
And you think, God, I'll stick it into something else. Thanks very much.
Yeah.
And that's the problem that I think we're getting. So however that all those costs can come down, because affordability is a ceiling for what people will pay.
Yeah.
So it's all well and good building something with kind of gold-plated toilets, but if people haven't got the money, they're not going to be able to pay it.
Yeah, I offer little solace. We live in a capitalist society, and it's not really the job of the government.
No, it's not.
To subsidise the construction of private houses.
Let's get on to non-private houses.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Why? So, since Margaret Thatcher and selling off kind of social homes and all that, local authorities have not been building houses in any way close to where they were kind of 30, 40, 50 years ago.
Yeah.
Why is that? And what can be done to get that sorted?
Well, I think the simple answer is money. I think the conclusion that Jackie Sadek and I came to when we wrote Broken Homes and finished it and presented it to various people is the only answer to the housing crisis is the construction of publicly subsidised homes. In fact, we did a think tank piece for somebody on that very subject. We called them public rental homes, which would allow small builders to get involved. So the idea was, you're an SME, council's got some land, get 10 houses on it. Instead of going through we want X amount of affordable, you say to the council, you put in the land, I will give you 3 of these houses at half price so you can rent them out.
Mm-hmm.
And they would do that as a tender process. So there are 4 SMEs looking at it, and they'll all look at it and they'll go, I'll give you 3, I'll give you 2, I'll give you 4. So you could tender out these small sites based upon the number of subsidised houses that the private builder would give you. Not all this affordable percentage nonsense. Anyway, it's a lot. There's a think tank report on it with my name on it. That would work for smaller builders, you see. You don't put the land in, the council does. You build them and you say to them, I'll give you 3 cheap ones, but I'm going to sell the rest at full market price.
How do you do that in Blackpool, where the cost of it, where the market price of a house is 50 grand, and you've got to build it, it's going to cost you 200 to 300
Well, you
grand.
don't do it. You don't do it. You can only do it where it works.
So London.
It's not. It's the southeast, essentially.
Yeah.
It's the southeast.
So does everyone have to live in the southeast unless they
That's
can
what
afford
we do.
privately?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. The money thing, there has been some work done, which hasn't yet come out, on the need. Let's go back to the 1.5 million, which is just nonsense.
Yeah.
Everybody knows that's nonsense. Nobody wants to admit it's nonsense, and it still forms the backbone of the government's planning bill for some strange reason. The numbers are fairly clear. If you increase over the next, by 2029, we might do 1.1.
Mm-hmm.
If it goes gangbusters, 1.3. The reason it's not going to get any higher is that you need about 90,000 publicly subsidised houses a year to get anywhere near 1.5 million. And that is not going to happen because the cost per house is about 200 grand. And 90,000 houses at 200 grand a house is a huge sum of money. It's anywhere between 10 and 25 billion a year would need to go into the subsidising of affordable housing. And by that I mean social housing.
The biggest mistake UK made was never kind of doing a sovereign wealth fund when they kind of had some golden assets behind them, because if you can invest, and as a local authority or as a government you can go, well, our return, we can see where our return is coming in 20, 30
Yeah.
years because it
Yeah.
reduces those costs down.
I think it's one of those things that in theory is an unassailably good idea, but getting somebody to do it in practice, it's like you might as well bang your head against the wall, and the wall is actually the wall of the Treasury, because they control that, and it's public sector money, and they don't like risking it. Now the sovereign wealth fund thing is coming in. That might help, but I think it's going to be used for infrastructure projects.
But surely if housing isn't infrastructure, I don't know what is.
I don't think it is.
You touched on this earlier. Is land banking a real concern?
No, it's not. If you look at how long it takes to build out a big estate, it's somewhere between 4 and 9 years, essentially. That the planning horizon for let's say it's Barratt. There's an example in the book. They've given me the bar chart. So example in the book is very simple. They option the land in year 1. By the end of year 2 or 3, they get planning. And then it takes 1 a week. It takes X number of years to build it out, 5 or 6 years. And therefore, what do you need to have in order to get continuity of sales? You need a land bank as long as it takes to build out a site, which is 4 to 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the major contractors, most major house builders, that's what they plan on. And otherwise, they're in the dark. They can't have a 5-year plan. They can't, because they haven't got the land. I know some of them have too much land, and the explanation doesn't always hold water, because sometimes they trade land. But they're very smart. They don't buy the land, they option it.
Yeah.
And then they don't pay for the land.
They forward fund it.
They forward fund it, and then but they don't pay the landowner for the land until they get planning, and only then do they work out what they give the landowner. I mean, they're so all the way round.
I mean, if you can, but then the landowner is obviously makes a decision, because I mean, when we put an offer in, for example, we'll say, well, here's what we can pay you now. Here's what we can pay you when we finish, or here's what we can pay you after we get planning.
Yeah.
Take it or leave it, and unless someone else can come along and better it, it's up to them, isn't it?
So I think I've got a lot of not very good things to say about house builders, but essentially the land banking thing is a side issue. Where it's not an issue is all the in-betweener guys, as I call them, the guys that option, buy, and
land assembly and
the land assembly.
Yeah.
They regard themselves as proper people, but frankly, they're just speculators. In any other way, they're just land speculators.
And I'm going to flip-flop back to the social housing again, and the private rental sector, because at the moment we have this thing where landlords are being demonised in the residential market. Yeah. But the problem is landlords are needed by the social sector because there's not enough social rental homes. So the PRS is picking up that slack. Yep. Whether or not it's going to come in, the idea is in 20 years to just have this all as institutional build to rent ready. But if that is the case, it won't be ready in time. Or if it's the case that, yes, local authorities are going to start building, again, it won't be ready in time. So why do you think it is that there's so much kind of this rhetoric around landlords at the moment? And what can be done? Should the PRS be, I don't know, promoted more in a positive way? Or is it the case that actually, no, the government have got this right and we just need to get kind of other local authority needs to build more? But what happens in the meantime?
Yeah, it's an interesting area, the build to rent. As is the permitted development rights sector. So these two sectors are essentially the first build to rent is capturing the people that can't afford to buy, and the permitted development right sector is capturing the people who can't afford to either rent or buy. And the first sector, I think, there's some very big players in it. They'll be fine. They'll always be there, and they will probably grow over the next few years. And it's very sensitive to capital, but they've got lots of capital, so that will keep going. I think most of them are run fairly well. They're not wicked landlords, because they can't be, because they got reputations, because they're called this or that. They're called Granger or Greystar. They can't afford to be seen as being wicked landlords.
You say it's for people that can't afford to rent, but I mean
To buy.
To buy, sorry, yeah. But I mean the rents are bloody expensive.
Well, they can't afford the deposit, I suppose, is the way to put it.
Yeah.
They keep the rents. I mean, they've done very well recently, as is the student accommodation. The sort of sector that nobody really talks about is the permitted development rights sector. I think there's a lot of people under the carpet making a lot of money out of this. There's a lot of places around London, especially, where old office blocks are being turned into rather dreadful single aspect homes of maybe 500 square feet if you're lucky.
I mean, that's stopped now because they I mean, look, permitted development right is a great thing when it's done properly. Now, what they made a massive mistake on is not having space standards, which they then changed. That was a disaster because you did get these kind of rabbit hutches, and I think that's probably what Boris Johnson was kind of talking about.
Yes, it may well have been.
And I think they've changed it with kind of, look, you've still got to have your cycle storage, bin storage and things like that, because that changed it. But I mean, there aren't many local authorities now that don't have Article 4 in place, which stops permitted development rights.
Well, there's a lot around London, and there are tensions being caused by councils allowing PDR office blocks to be changed, because inner London councils get more to house their homeless than do councils in the home counties. So what are they doing? They're sending them into the home counties and changing the nature of towns in and around the home counties, causing a rise in xenophobia. And it's not something that's spoken of very much, but the nature of a lot of towns in the southeast of England has changed because of it. Now, you might think it's a good thing, you might think it's a bad thing. I used to be slightly worried about it, but I've realised that, I won't say which my local town is, but actually the PDR flats have revived the town centre. It's full of shops now.
Well, now you've got
these
football.
people. So you can either think it's a bad thing if you're a racist or a good thing if you're a capitalist. I don't mind which. But it's an area which, it's one of the few things the Tories did, which would like it or not, actually worked. It has produced a lot of homes.
Well, exactly. It allowed you,
bad ones and good ones.
It allowed you to build quickly because you didn't have to wait for that planning, and it gave you more. For an SME developer or any developer, it gave you security of knowing, right, here, if I can tick these boxes and satisfy these requirements, I can get through. Unlike a typical planning where there's so much grey area and you don't really know kind of what the answers are.
So why don't small builders get more involved in PDR?
They do.
They do.
They do. That's most of what they do, because that's where the security is. The problem is now finding those. So what you see is these office blocks will sell for way more than they would because that's priced in. So that de-risking of not having to go through the whole planning thing pushes up the price.
Of course it does,
So look, it's a free market type equation really, isn't it? So it all comes out in the wash. But yeah, look, if everything was PD of a form, i.e. a bit like an American planning zonal thing where it's much more tick box, then that would help. But then you've got these other problems of financing and finding the contractors to actually who's going to work on this site and build it. Peter, thank you so much for
That's
coming
been
on.
great.
It's been brilliant.
I've
Cheers.
enjoyed that.
Yeah, really good. Thank you.
I like talking.